Hello, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good.
Great.
Hey, Joy.
Oh, you can
You
hear.
en
Oh,
route?
hey, how are you?
Good.
Leaving space.
This is that time of day, huh?
Yep, yep. Time to get home.
hmm
Who is the Orisha for today?
Alokun.
Oh, thank you.
hmm
Got my video and drive home quickly. So I'm here.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, several folks who RSVP, so I want to give folks some time to get in the room. How's everyone's week been?
It's been pretty good for me. I'm actually in the middle of finishing up braiding my hair, so I'll be on camera in just a second. And I'm looking forward to spending the weekend with my best friend for her birthday.
Oh, nice.
Trying to get done so I can get to her.
That's very nice. Yeah, it's actually, I mean, it's brisk, but it's beautiful today. Yep, beautiful day today.
Hi, Ear.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Ugh, I just spoke like how I'm still at work. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Just caught myself.
I understand the urge.
Ugh.
People who call me on my voicemail, they don't recognize it's my voice. They
Oh
think I'm
yeah.
recording all the time. They
Yeah.
like wait after when I'm speaking, when I say hello, this,
Uh-huh.
and then they pause and uh, like they're waiting for the instructions from the voicemail.
Right.
Oh, oh, it's you.
Like, oh hey.
Yeah, I get that a lot. Yeah, it's been
Oh, I
interesting. Oh,
got
go ahead.
accepted to UIC. Oh, I'm sorry.
You did? School of
Yeah,
Social Work?
yes.
Ah, that's technically my alma mater for my PhD.
What I know another girl who went there for her PhD too.
I went there. I ABD, but I did attend and completed all my coursework and everything up to dissertation. So
Okay, I'm
yeah,
gonna need to pick your brain later.
I may have some useful information for you.
Okay, we going.
I
We going.
finished my PhD someplace else, but yeah,
Uh-huh.
I technically I think they consider me an alum because I went ABD. I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
hmm
Congratulations,
yeah.
Katie.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, by the way, right? I'm all about me right now. Congratulations, Katie.
Oh, thank you.
I was all focusing on my issue, my incomplete issues with UIC, and didn't congratulate you.
No, no, no. It's okay. I take it all. Thank you.
Congratulations. It's a great achievement. It's a great moment
I
when
know.
you have that
Patience
feeling.
was really
You have
getting me.
something. Yeah, it's a solid program. It's a solid program. I look forward to you having a good experience there.
Thank you.
hmm Good deal. Hey, Rosalind, how are you?
I made it.
Yay. All right. Yep, I know some folks RSVP, so I want to give those folks some time to get into the room. Let's see. Well, just like 1 or 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. Katie just let us know she was admitted to UIC School of Social Work.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I'm happy for it.
We so need more social workers.
Yep, indeed. Indeed. All right, get that going. All right, we're gonna start. I'll start my screen share. Okay.
Hey, good evening, everyone.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm okay. Sorry, man. I'm transitioning. I'm about 5 minutes from the house, so I'm on the phone right now. So I'll be on the computer in a moment.
Okay.
How y'all doing?
Doing good.
Good deal. Happy Friday.
Happy
Happy
Friday.
Friday. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I told my students it's like I don't take these Fridays for granted anymore.
That is very true.
Very, very true. End of the week. Made it to the end of the week.
That's right. That's right. Cannot take it for granted for any reason.
Not at all.
Yeah, that's right. So today we're gonna talk about Olokun. Olokun is owner of the oceans, but we're going to talk a little bit more about, of course, inner alignment. But Olokun's domain is much broader than that. So we'll talk about that. And there's a lot of historical, as I'll share, there's a lot of historical references that we need to make to Olokun, because Olokun is pretty unique Orisha in many ways. So of course we'll talk about who and what is Olokun, and then what I wanted to do is do a little something different today and talk about the history of Olokun worship, because I think particularly given the lineage of my lineage in Cuba, I'd be remiss not to mention it. And because it's Women's History Month, I thought it would be also some great insight into some of the history. Is a ton more, but touch a little bit on the history of the contributions of women to worship, to the worship of the Orishas in Cuba. So we're going to cover some of that today. And then we're going to talk about how do we work with Olokun. And because Olokun is so vast and so there's so many different types of ways that Olokun has been understood, related to, and worshipped, that it will be, there are many interpretations for how one can work with Olokun in terms of inner alignment, but I'll share some of my insights and things that I found to be very helpful, starting with my initial journey with Olokun many, many years ago. So as you can notice, there's a coral reef that I wanted to feature for this kind of representation of Olokun. Because Olokun is a very considered to be, oh, there's Amber. Olokun is considered to be a very ancient and it's literally a primordial Orisha, meaning that there were some Orisha that were present at the time that the earth was created, and at the time that the earth was even before the earth was created and became a part of the essential part of what we understand to be our literal, our lived environment. And so Olokun is an Orisha that is a part of that story, a part of that creation story. And there are many patakis or sacred stories about how Olokun rivaled Olodumare for to be ruler of this world. Um, and um, and so there's a lot of and that in itself, the fact that Olodumare was challenged by Olokun says a lot about how the power and depth and mightiness that Olokun holds in our tradition, and respect that Olokun holds in our tradition. Um, so Olokun, because Olokun's domain is really all waters of the earth. Olokun does translate to mean owner of the ocean, but technically Olokun owns all waters. Whether there's Olokun worship in rivers in Nigeria and in Benin too, I believe as well, but definitely Nigeria. There's more than one river tributary to Olokun in West Africa and in Nigeria. And although Olokun and Yemanja share the domain of the ocean, as Yemanja has been worshipped in Cuba, because originally, as I may have mentioned this before, maybe not in this class, but originally Yemaya is a riverine Orisha. She became a Orisha that's associated with the ocean with the Middle Passage. So she shares the ocean with Olokun, but Olokun has always had this domain as her domain. And all of the sacred treasures of the world that the original treasures of the world come from the ocean. So Olokun's presence in the ocean as an owner of all treasures, the owner of great wealth and abundance is something that's part of understanding that all of the coral, which is considered to be a sign of wealth, cowrie shells, which were used as money and currency, come from the ocean. So, given that that is Olokun's domain, Olokun literally owns wealth because Olokun owns cowries. Olokun owns all of the beads that were traded in ancient times and considered precious, possessions. So this makes Olokun have immense wealth, a wealth that is untold, because the ocean covers so much of a part of our world. Olokun has the biggest domain of the world because of that. So Olokun really is tied, no matter really whether you worship Olokun in Cuba or in Nigeria or in Benin. Olokun is affiliated with immense wealth, untold wealth. And because Olokun really, with Olokun and Yemanja sharing different domains of the ocean, Yemanja sharing more of the top layers of the ocean, and Olokun really occupying the lower, the depths of the ocean to the ocean floor. Olokun is in all of in the parts of the ocean we can't see. Olokun is affiliated and associated with great mystery and the unknown. One of the main proverbs that we hear that is often associated with Olokun is "No one knows what lies at the bottom of the ocean." And we know now that we have divers that have equipment that can take you to the bottoms of the ocean, but there's a great risk and sacrifice to make that journey, right? Because you have to you're dealing with weight and you're dealing with water that's literally tons of water on top of you. So it's a great risk that people go into that area of deep mystery, but it's an area that Olokun keeps some of his and her sacred creatures, creatures that are luminescent. Many of you have probably seen some of those deep water uh, photography or deep water um, films or documentaries where they show us at the bottom of the ocean, and there's a lot of unknowns about why some of the creatures at the bottom of the ocean can literally light themselves up. And literally are luminescent or in other or have otherworldly features, and that's part of Olokun's domain. Olokun also, I think, and I can say in my experience for sure, and I know with others I've who I know work with Olokun. Olokun occupies a place of questioning where we can quest or go on journeys or begin at a place where we have certain issues or concerns or 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 great mysteries in our own personal lives that that Olokun gives us a means to move through. One of my first encounters with Olokun was dealing with a personal concern that I had in my own life that I had to go through a very um, transformative journey to heal through, and that experience changed my life. So I would say, along with questing and journeying, Olokun is associated with really great transformation that one can experience from being willing to be open to mystery and being open to not knowing all the answers and being open to moving forward to and going through processes that can help a person realize their really great potential in themselves at the end of it. As you've heard me mention, Olokun being both male and female, that is because in certain parts um, of Yoruba land, in particular in Benin, in certain areas of Egbado, and certain areas in outside of that, uh, Olokun is worshipped as male. And when Olokun, well, actually not Egbado, some areas outside of Egbado, but when Olokun, in some areas of Nigeria and in Benin, Olokun is worshipped as female. In some Patakis, Olokun has many wives, has great wealth, and in some areas of Benin, their kings are considered to be descendants of Olokun. And so in some shrines in Benin, you have figureheads of former kings that are dually ancestors and considered to be divine emissaries of Olokun. And there's also this idea of Olokun as female, and that's the Olokun aspect of Olokun that we worship in Cuba. In Nigeria and in some parts of Benin, Olokun has many roles, like I explained before about Olegba having many different roles or aspects to his worship. Olokun in Nigeria had numerous roles and roads that are affiliated through praise names of Olokun that was not kept in Cuba. But the idea of Olokun as a feminine, generative Orisha is that one that can support many, like being a feminine but deeper, like a feminine complement to Yamaya, is what we see in worship with Olokun in Cuba. Olokun wasn't really retained as an Orisha as well, or as it wasn't retained. There weren't very many priests of Olokun, or if there were, the worship of Olokun was not retained in Brazil to the same extent as it's been retained in Cuba. Olokun worship is very big in Cuba, very prominent in Cuba, and I'll explain a lot about how that goes into the history of worship of Olokun in Cuba. Olokun also deals a lot with emotional stability. In much the same way as we affiliate Yemanja with supporting people who may have emotional imbalances. Olokun is also considered an Orisha that can be a healing force for people who have um, emotional instabilities that require support and require a lot of support for the Ori, or require a lot of support for the person to have, either, lots of opportunities to have hope in the world, have hope in what they're going through and not despair. So Olokun is one that saves us from despair when we're faced with it. And another issue with emotional instability that Olokun deals a lot with is um, the rage issue. Oh, sorry, there's two people waiting. Um, Olokun is because of Olokun's connection to the bottom of the ocean. That part of that part of our planet sits on top of molten lava, right? You know that there's a connection between tsunamis and instabilities with the tectonic plates that are at the bottom of the ocean. That if they're shifted or if they're disturbed in some way, that disturbance can cause massive um, tides that can lead to massive damage, and at seashores. So we know that. So there's an association with that heat that's at the core of the earth that Olokun sits on top of. That means that Olokun is really like the gatekeeper between that calm and coolness that we see, that doesn't look like any disturbance at all at the top of the ocean, and that potential rage that's boiling underneath, that if disturbed, or if there's any imbalance, or if there's anything that puts it out of in some you know uh, conflict with how it normally sits, that can cause, like I said, tsunamis, earthquakes. And that is kind of a symbolically rage that can happen, or rage that can befall a person. Are there any questions about anything I've talked about so far in terms of Olokun? No questions? Okay. I have to take one quick break. 1 second. I'll be right back. Oh, she did do it. Yay. Okay. Oh, my daughter took care of business. Yay. I asked her to do something for me. I wanted to make sure she did it. Okay.
Oh, I do have a question, Iya.
Oh, sure.
So, if Yemeya and Oshun has the coral, does Olokun also over coral as well?
Olokun. Oh, that's actually an interesting question. So, Olokun, there's the story, of Partaki, that Yamanja let Oshun have coral. Yamanja is the original owner of coral, of the two of them, but the true progenitor of the coral is Olokun. So if you see in shrines, and I have some with mine, but mine is white. But if you see shrines in Olokun shrines, there's a beautiful book done that showed full color pictures. It was a photographic essay, photo book that was done of Olokun shrines in Benin. Breathtaking. All you see is coral. All
Ooh.
you see, all of the regalia that is worn by the chiefs, the obas, and the priests, um, and the caretakers of those of the shrines of Olokun. They coral is much coral. So Olokun really is considered the progenitor of that coral. There, worship of Olokun, particularly in Nigeria, is synonymous with use of coral. Synonymous.
All
Um,
colors.
Olokun, and that's another interesting question. So Olokun has been affiliated largely with, and by the way, I received Olokun both from the Benin tradition and the Lukumi tradition. So the Olokun worship in Europe, in Lukumi in Cuba, is primarily blue and white. So anyone who goes through that process will receive blue and white, similar to how one may receive Yemanja, except Yemanja has different roads, which means that those shades or colors may change, but primarily blue and white. Olokun worship in Yoruba land is primarily white. And oftentimes particularly the masculine worship, the masculine the Olokun worshipped as a masculine energy is akin to Obatala, very akin to Obatala. So even my road of Olokun, I have a road of Olokun in Benin, and that road of Olokun is all white, and he sits on top of the hill at the bottom of the ocean, and it is a male Olokun. And so he has the dominion of all of the wealth of all of the ocean. That's the road that I have. A local in Hinotete is that road. So that road is very much akin to Obatala. In some areas of Benin, Olokun is worshipped as, as we look at Obatala as the father of the Orishas, or the primary like the primary arc divinity of our tradition. Olokun in some areas of West Africa is looked exactly the same way as Obatala, as the arc divinity of all of the other Orishas. The one that is closest to our ability to talk about our creation stories and how we came to be. Olokun had a very prominent role in that, in their stories, as Obatala has in ours. So there's a lot of and actually the color red also is very prominent. So you'll see red and white in a lot of those shrines. Um, in Benin in particular, you see a lot of red and white. Um, and you really don't see blue at all, but you see, because of the ways that we have in Lukumi affiliated Olokun and Yemaja as being two halves of one whole. Olokun has taken on a lot of uh, the characteristics in terms of color schemes and things of that nature that Yemanja has. Does that explain it for you?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? I want to make sure I got everybody in chat. Okay. No one else trying to get one. Yes. So that supports everyone in terms of questions you might have. Okay. So the history of Olokun in from Egbado to Cuba. So I wanted to pay homage to the women who are some of the founders of our traditions in Cuba, and who happen to also be very important um, to the origin stories of how Olokun worship has been brought to Cuba and preserved in Cuba. And so the two women that you see here, these are very old pictures, as you can see, from the 1800s, because these women lived in the 1800s. This is a picture of Oshabi. The woman in the sepia brown is Oshabi, and the woman in the grayish tone picture is Obatero. So, as you all know, we have folks who were brought from different areas of Yoruba land who are who came to Cuba. So when they came to Cuba, they brought their traditions with them. They brought their knowledge of their traditions with them. And these were two women who were responsible in that regard. So I'm going to start with Regla, which in the olden days, according to several sources, including Baba John Mason, who wrote an excellent book on local worship that I would highly recommend anyone who wants to know about this Orisha and how that Orisha has been worshipped both in Yoruba land and in Cuba. It is no one will write a more definitive book. It is the definitive book. And I will show you, I'm going to take off my screen, my virtual background, so you guys can see, eventually you can see the book at the end, so I can show it to you. But Ara Olokun was the name that the Lukumi who arrived to Cuba called Regla. Regla was a town where many people who were enslaved first landed when they came to Cuba. So it was, in some ways, I think there's some, I would want, maybe liken it to almost like Congo Square in Cuba. But it's a very important town. So Regla is located, some of you may know, in Havana, right? So it was a very important port, and it was a very important place where some of the progenitors that I'm actually directly descended of, I can say, in my spiritual line, who brought or had a very big hand in making sure that a local worship was continued in Cuba. So one of those folks in Regla who what everyone should recognize and pay homage to is actually Remekio Herrera. His Adeshina is his Orisha name. So Adeshina was from Ijesha land, and he was, and this story has been promoted for many centuries. So he came to Cuba, I believe, in the 1820s, and as enslaved from Ijesha. It was told that he actually was a babalawo, which meant that he was a diviner, um, and divined what we call ikin, which are palm kernel nuts. They're black nuts that are about this round, and they're used in the palm by the babalawo. So they grab the palm nuts in their hand and use that as a divining tool, and so that is their equivalent. For those of you who've had a reading with me, I use cowrie shells. They use palm kernel nuts. So it was said that he took these ikin that were his divine tools for divining and swallowed them and kept them in his and so that he could preserve the um, the capacity to use the consecrated ikin that he had when he left, when he was taken from his homeland, and took them with him and preserved them, through that journey in the Middle Passage, and brought them to Cuba, and so he had that with him when he came to Cuba. That's the kind of sacrifice that many of our ancestors made to preserve the traditions that we now take for granted. So he was known very widely for having a lot of knowledge and a lot of ritual knowledge about Olokun, and brought that knowledge to Regla, and supported the knowledge being spread to other priests. Um, Tataga and Tan, which some of you probably have heard me say, that's another um, priest, Eduardo Rodriguez, who was also brought from Yoruba land. I don't believe I don't have the information about where he was actually brought from. So I cannot say specifically which town or which area of region of Yoruba land he was brought from. But he was one of the last, if not the last, Orisha priests to dance the mask of Olokun. So there was mask dancing that we equate to what they do in Yoruba land with the Gele Day, with the masks that represent the Orisha, and the masks are danced in the street. So these rituals from Yoruba lands were preserved in Cuba for, you know, I don't know if it was quite a century, but it was for a while. And he was considered, I think, like I said, one of the last to dance the Mask of Olokun in Cuba. And now we get to Matanzas, which is Ara Ata, so the land of the hot peppers. um, so this is another part of my personal spiritual lineage that also connects to Olokun. So in Matanzas, you have, coming from Egbado, Montserrat Gonzalez. So Obatero brought and preserved Olokun traditions from Egbado land. And she, along with Yeye Tolokun and with Feminita Gonzalez Oshabi, who she was not her god. So Feminita Gomez, uh, Gonzalez, sorry, Oshabi, was not Obatero's goddaughter, but because Yemanja claimed Feminita at the time she was initiated from Oshun, and she came under the tutelage of Montserrat Gonzalez, who had vast knowledge of Olokun and Yemanja. So they have a relationship that between these two women, they brought um, a lot the structure that we know today to be the way we receive Orishas, the way we worship Orishas, the way we develop order in terms of how ceremonies are done, how ritual work is done in procedural fashion, was because of these women. They are credited widely for having given the tradition actual structure for broader participation and broader knowledge to be brought through and carried through generations, so that more people could participate, and that could be an actual lineage that we can point to in terms of order, in terms of every part of the tradition that we experience. And these women were what we call Oriates. So Oriates are considered masters of ceremony in our tradition, in Lukumi tradition in Cuba. And these women and were some of the Oriates who were Black women for many decades. They were Black women. It wasn't until some changes in gender hierarchy in the tradition that you saw that go away. But for many years, we had Black women who were leaders and builders of the lineages that I know I have now, and some of you have now too, that are carrying on today. So we owe a lot of what we know to be this tradition and its rituals and its practices and its theology to Black women. So some of you, when I divine, I call out names. You always hear me say, mention Obatero and Oshabi, and for that reason, and because their initiations led to mine. So I wanted to pay homage to them and give them their props. So, any questions about what I mentioned?
I have a question actually, because I just don't know as much about. So, at the time, was the practice of Lukumi, was it mostly sort of retained to more of the African descendants, or before it sort of spread out? I know people are. I mean, that's not very clear because people are much more intermixed than I'm saying. But I'm
Mhm.
just curious. Yeah.
I understand your question.
Mhm,
It was a religion of Black folks.
mhm,
It was a religion for and among Black people.
mhm,
Um, and to my knowledge, um, and I could learn more about this, but to my knowledge, white adherents did not come into the tradition until much, much later. Um, the religion was looked at as backward, and this is from my teachers who have done extensive study of the religion in Cuba. The religion by white people, particularly slave owners and landed class, saw the religion as backward and reflecting of superstition. And it wasn't until some of the folks who were enslaved uh, and practice these traditions were able to actually support not only themselves but their owners that started to change in terms of at least some once they were free that some of those relationships started to change, but um, same as with folk medicine here in the United States, same thing, same exact thing. um, so you have probably not until the 1900s do you have more of the landed class and those who are of European descent. Um, and intermarriage also was a part of that. My the Oriate of our Ile, he is descendant of Black folks, and he is a white Cuban. So, so there is between intermarriage and those relationships, those very um, complicated and oppressive relationships that were part of what we call that the slave society back then. Um, really did, like, so they were complex because there was healing going on, right? Black folks were healing white folks through these traditions, so that's complex. It's not simple in some regards, but it did open the door to some at least acknowledgement, because for years, even from my teachers telling me, white folks wouldn't acknowledge that they were part of these traditions. They wouldn't acknowledge it. So it wasn't for many years. Um, and I think also and this is my opinion. I think the introduction to white majority white audiences to these religions by anthropologists like Fernando Ortiz, Lydia Cabrera, um, El Monte I have that book as well. It's a seminal book. Fernando Ortiz was a well-known historian, and so those historians and anthropologists and sociologists, and to some extent too, Herskovitz, um, Melvin Herskovitz, Harold Kurlander, um, I'm missing some, William Bascom, who from in the 1950s, who himself was an initiate. and studied these things, I think you have in the 20th century, particularly in the early to mid 20th century, um, individuals who may have started as curiosity, who knows, but they ended up really doing a lot to preserve knowledge in some cases of our traditions, not only for scholarly purposes, but for practitioners' purposes. Because some of those same um, Judith Gleason, I believe from the 1950s, maybe later. Her books on Ogun and Mama Susan Wanger in Nigeria. So you had in the 1900s these white folks who saw something in this tradition. Um, and I don't know the origin stories of why or how or what it was, but they saw something in these traditions and they sought to find out for themselves what they were about. And it also lended some legitimacy to the cosmology and the theology that informed these traditions and gave white people who would probably not give themselves that license or give themselves that consideration to take a second look at these traditions. That's my opinion. Um, but you have to look at that. You have William Bascom, who's well renowned um, scholar from a major research university in the 1950s, going to Nigeria, going to Cuba, looking at this stuff. Melvin Herskovitz, same thing. Those are in studying Haiti and in all those places. So I think those were touch points um, in the interest of more diverse groups of folks beyond Black folks. That's my take.
No, thank you for that. Could I ask one more question? 'Cause I think um,
Sure.
just around, because I know you were talking about that these women in particular are in some ways the root of and also the master leaders.
Hmm.
Um, so were women even in Yoruba land? Were women also leaders and orients as well, or did that shift because of the just the transatlantic slave trade and the
Yeah, that's a good question. You see this in every they were in Yoruba land leaders. Yes. You see in every manifestation of this tradition in the diaspora, women in leadership, in building and uh, building capacity for the traditions to be preserved. You see this in Brazil, no doubt. Some of the stuff we saw in Yemen in the documentary on Yemanja made it very evident, right? Some of the oldest houses only initiated women first. That was in the documentary we saw, right? They say they only initiated women, and these were the oldest houses in Brazil. Um, so you have um, these connections that are not born out of some newfangled things. These traditions were maintained during slavery. The cabildos and the other types of structures that were built to support um, the preservation of the tradition in Cuba or the Tejeros in Brazil, those were established during slavery, not after, right? There were some who, I believe Adesina, who was manumitted, he was freed from enslavement. He was freed by the 1850s. And he actually had the chance, I understand, to go back to his village where he came from in Egeisha, and he ended up coming back to Cuba. But but a lot of these traditions and practices did not only begin after slavery ended, they began during slavery and were preserved during slavery. So there was no shift in gender dynamics or gender roles that women who practiced the tradition had any privilege to take advantage of because of slavery. right? So they were carrying on in the traditions and roles that they assumed when they were actually priests in Yoruba land. And that's true even to my teachers. I have teachers who are also from Egbado tradition now that I study with regularly. And that is still the case. Women are still very much leaders, and the head of the Shango, uh, the head of worship in Shango, the head in Shango for many years was a woman. So there's definitely, and I know that's true in some areas in terms of worship of Olokun and Ekbado land too. So um, women has always had roles of leadership in African-based traditions that I've been a part of and participated in. Um, and for my witnessing of women in my lineage in Europe, in Lukumi, and in my studies and knowledge of what's true in Yoruba land.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yep. Any other questions? Y'all good? Okay. So I wanted to give everyone that context because um, I wanted us to appreciate how and where this comes from and how it connects to who we are now. So whenever I have an opportunity to do that, and with Olokun, it's just, as you can see, it's such a rich history, and I only tapped the surface of it. There are many names I didn't mention, but because it's such a rich history, it's really worth mentioning because of how there's so many wonderful, rich connections between, even because of my study with priests in Egbado. There's such, even now, very rich connections between how Olokun is worshipped and preserved in Cuba, and by extension here in the United States, and how it's even worshipped in Ecuador land even today. So thank you for taking that journey with me. So working with Olokun, now I want to go back to some of the things I mentioned in terms of who and what Olokun is. So I've mentioned here being willing to ask the hard questions to get to those big answers, because Olokun is one of those Orisha who, if we are willing to really not not fight when we need to grow, and not fight when we need to challenge ourselves, and not fight when we need to evolve and go through some form of transformation. Um, Olokun is there to help us with that and facilitate that for us. Because Olokun is considered to be very big and very big shoulders to stand on in a way, right? Even in making offerings to Olokun, many priests will tell you Olokun eats anything, right? Because Olokun is the ocean, and Olokun has this big breadth of um, of capacity to take on so much, right? And I think that's why Olokun is associated with being able to really get to big changes in our lives, big questions that we might have for ourselves, big things we have to tackle for ourselves. If you have something really um, that might seem complicated, or might seem out of reach, or might seem um, something that we couldn't see ourselves accomplishing, Olokun is one of those orishas that we can definitely go to, that can help us to order that process and go through it in a way that we can see something at the end of it that's recognizable to what we want to achieve. And so Olokun is really good with helping with that process and working through those big questions we have for ourselves. Um, whether they're very personal questions or career questions, financial questions, Olokun is very instrumental in helping with that. I like to say there's no language for poverty of any kind with Olokun, because Olokun just there's no scarcity in Olokun. So if we work with Olokun, we can't deal in the idea of scarcity. We cannot deal in the idea of what we don't have or what we can't have. Olokun is not a Risha that has any kind of language for that. Because Olokun holds the wealth, the biggest reservoir of our natural wealth, um, and the oldest reservoir of our natural wealth, we say too. Um, Olokun, we see Olokun as not having any limits. When we look out at the ocean, can we see the end of the ocean? We can't, right? It's just literally just water, and then there's just the horizon. And that's how we oftentimes look at Olokun, as being that idea that we don't have to um, connect or identify ourselves with having scarcity. That we don't have to identify or connect with ourselves with having nothing or having um, or lacking in anything. That we have immense opportunities to have prosperity in this life, whether it be spiritual, because and I say poverty of any kind because Olokun also helps us to have great insight and great intuition. Working with Olokun can very much enhance your capacity to see, in a mysterious way or in a mystical way, and in a very pragmatic and kind of day-to-day way. So in either case, Olokun can really give you a wealth of spiritual insight and a wealth of spiritual capacity. Um, and that's part of Olokun's mysterious nature. And so working with Olokun that way can be very supportive of how you grow in that way. Oh yeah, you. Thank you for putting that in the chat, Andreas. Andreas has put in the chat the link to Baba John Mason's books. He's written several, and so he made a connection to that for the Olokun book. And like I say, I highly recommend it for anyone who wants to learn more about Olokun. Um, so when I t- so that's why I say there's no language for poverty in working with Olokun. Olokun is all about growth and transformation. So if you're having issues with wanting to improve where you are financially, um, Olokun is a Orisha that we go to help with that. And even the roads of Olokun in Benin, they all deal with wealth in one form or another, or access to wealth. Um, and also, Olokun deals with healing, of course, healing and healing from things that we've gone through. Olokun oftentimes can be a salve um, to help us get through things that have taken a toll on us emotionally. Um, Olokun is one of those orishas that as I mentioned about Yemanja, you can do cleanings with Olokun and leave that at Olokun's feet, walk away and have trust and hope that Olokun will support you in getting you through that thing you're going through. Olokun's very, very instrumental that way. Olokun helps us to have hope. And I want to read, actually, I have the book here. I don't know if you guys can see it. I have to take my screen off. Anyway, I saw this, I remembered this in the forward. I'm going to read something about Olokun that Baba John Mason said that emphasizes taking care of ourselves. And we'll talk more about that. So I'll start with an Orisha devotee advised through divination to receive the Orisha Olokun asked, "What is Olokun for and why do I need it? For yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Olokun symbolizes the justification of hope. Every culture has such a symbol. Millions of Yoruba and Benin survived the death horror of the Middle Passage, then looked to Olokun and Yemanja as tangible symbols of deliverance and rebirth. Just the fact that we survive being born and live day by day into old age is a miracle. Olokun helps to produce the miracle of our coming to this world, prospering while here, and means of our returning to our spiritual home. So what I take from what he's referring to is that even as there was a lot of despair in the Middle Passage, and Olokun is a very important Orisha as part of the Middle Passage, which I think also may be another reason why um, I wanted to talk about the traveling of Olokun from Yoruba land to Cuba. Um, when many of our ancestors who were on that, as Baba John Mason calls death horror voyage, many, as we know, many did sacrifice themselves, right? We know that. And in so doing, there were, and you know, I've heard many stories about how the role they took was to rather than to go into bondage, they chose to remain free. But there also was this idea that they basically have also served as protectors. Those who did martyr themselves served as protectors for those who lived and moved on. So even in that moment of loss and them sacrificing themselves in that loss, or martyring themselves, and being taken into the realm of Olokun, we believe that Olokun also served as someone who held our treasures, which were our ancestors, and supported them so that they could actually remain conscious of their role to protect those who came after them. So Lokun has a lot of symbolic connections to hope and symbolic connections to our idea of hope for those of us who know we have ancestors who did not make it to the new world with those of us who are now descendants. So I wanted to just kind of bring that to bear because um, for some of us, hope is knowing that we have those who are looking after us, but we also have an obligation to remain moving forward so that we can realize those dreams that they would have us to obtain. Um, so finally, one thing I mentioned before was that Olokun dealt a lot with the reservoirs of rage, dealt with that whole idea between being the gatekeeper between the area of the bottom of the ocean, which kind of protects us from the that core that is the heat that we recognize as the core of the earth, and the coolness that lies above it. So Olokun helps us to deal with those rages that are hidden, those rages that are not obvious or not that people don't see, but that is always there. So Olokun helps us to manage that, keep it cool so that there's no disturbance to it, much like we don't want disturbance to those tectonic plates that are at the bottom of the ocean. So Olokun is the one that kind of gives us the opportunity to manage that so that we can function, we can be productive, and we can be engaged in positive ways in the world that we occupy. So that is the end of my presentation. I wanted to give us a chance to talk a little bit and reflect a little bit on what we talked about today, and I wanted to get your feedback around what some of the things that I mentioned and your thoughts about it, or any other questions you might have.
So when you're making offerings to Olokun in nature,
Mhm.
how do you signify it's for her and not for Yemeya?
Well, that's what invocation and prayer is about,
Oh,
right? So that's when we make when we do any offering to an Orisha, we have to acknowledge who we are, what is happening, and what we are asking for, and who we are directing that request to. So even if we do it in our minds, if we do it in our minds or in our process for, even as you're getting things, like I've mentioned to some of you, the ebo starts when you start looking for things. Like if I ask for some of you to bring something to an Orisha or to make an offering to your ancestors or to um, you're setting that intention in your mind that I have these things to do to fulfill this intention, right? That is part of the process. So you're already in communication with the possibility of that process being taken care of and moving forward. So by the time you get to the place, and that consciousness is a lived consciousness, right? That experience is part of your lived consciousness. So if I know that I have to make an offering to Oshun, and I know that what I want, and I'm thinking, what am I going to give her? And I'm going in the store and I'm looking at oranges and I'm like, oh wow, that's really pretty. I love the color. Oh, it smells good too. Oh yeah. Or even that this is nice and round. Oh, that one's looking kind of rank, kind of. I don't want. I'm not. That's part of the process, right? That you're setting your intentions to say, you're not going to give her anything. You're going to give her something that's reflects your care and love for your Orisha and care and love for yourself. So all of that goes into the process. So even though we know Olokun is at the top, occupies a certain part of the ocean, and Yamaja does too, when we go to that place, when we want to make that connection to Orisha, if we've gone through a process where we've taken our time and gone through our journey to get to that place, that connection is already made. So now we're formalizing it by using our invocation, um, using our presence, using our intentions, using our focus, stating what we're there for, stating what we're doing, stating who it's for, stating what we're praying for. That's all a part of it.
so she really takes anything. She doesn't have any special Ebo.
No, not particularly. My Olokun from Benin sure does, but she does. So I would not give her certain things that the Olokun that I have in Lukumi would take. But it doesn't mean that we don't have prescribed offerings that we would say should go to the Orisha. But we say that there's far less. Um, there's you don't put a lot of like um, boundaries around what that is. But yes, but yeah, that doesn't mean that it's like you can just give her just anything. You gotta have some care and thought into it. But she does have a lot that she likes, and you
Okay.
have a lot of options for what that is. Like certain Orishas, like I think I mentioned to you guys before, certain things I wouldn't cook for Watala at all, just because it's a Funfun Orisha or a white Orisha. But a Lokun in this tradition is not a Funfun Orisha. So you have a broader, a lot broader palette to draw from in terms of what you give a local. And even for the Agban or the ceremony where you do the big cleaning for a local, there's a lot that you put into that. It's like a very big, it's a very kind of big ritual that involves a lot of different types of foods, right? So it's so Olokun is it has a big enough palette, so to speak, to take a lot of options for offerings.
And does she have a salutation?
Yeah, she has quite a few. Hmm. Hmm. She has quite a few. I did not. I chose because I didn't know how much time I would have today because I knew I was going into the history and adding another slide, so I didn't go into. Um, I didn't prepare any salutations for today. Um, but you can. Um, I mean, if you're going to work with a local, and I would prefer you and I work together before I just give you instructions here on a video. But if you want to talk about working with a local, we can talk about that. But there are salutations you can use to greet a local. You can call a local by a local's name. There are some oriki that you can use, but they're pretty simple. It's not very. Some of them can be kind of long, but some of them are pretty simple, so we can talk about those too.
It's funny you so I wasn't really paying attention today to what the subject would be today. I just kind of signed on and I was like, okay, um but it's interesting because like a month ago I was reading one of my friends. I call her my sister because we had the same last name, but she wrote this piece called Rematriating Boraquin because she's from New York, but
Oh yeah.
she moved back to Puerto Rico. But I'm just gonna read a segment of it. I'll put the link in the chat. But I read it when she had sent it to me a while back, and I hadn't read it in full. I kind of read parts of it, and then I read it, and it was like mind blowing for me. But one part of it that I wanted to know more about, and then today we have the talk. But she said we just she's talking about this point of like where basically as people who are rematriating that we basically are going back into the water and back to the island. But anyway, she says, we descend the 28,000-foot depth to the place only Olokun knows, Orisha mystery of the seemingly infinite stretches of darkness, of treasures and abundance found in the ocean's depth. And when I read it, I didn't, I kind of picked up, I knew Olokun was an Orisha, I didn't know much about. So it was funny, like when I just happened upon today, like it made sense. I'll put the link in the chat. It's a really
That's
interesting piece.
beautiful, actually.
Yeah.
She just summed my she summed it up in like a poem.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a much longer piece, but I remember that stood out to me. So you actually gave it more depth because I didn't know much more than that.
yeah, but that's a very good representation, and especially I guess when we were discussing. Thank you.
Hmm.
Rematriating. I like
Yeah.
rematriating. Okay. Um, but yeah, I like that she and I both connected to that idea of Olokun being the kind of the keeper of all of those ancestral promises to remain free that we kept to ourselves as a people. Olokun is a caretaker of that legacy, and that legacy is part of our history. So it's and part of our really part of our treasure, part of our resistance. So that's
Isla said he had a question.
yes,
He had his hand.
Well, first I have glasses on
I noticed.
because I bought glasses from the Silver Room.
What?
Oh.
They're non-prescription.
They have the best glasses there.
I was checking you. I was like, we gotta talk about the glasses. They are very fly.
My question was, like how many Orisha are there? Because I didn't even know Olokun. Well, I think I did know, but I didn't know. Like you had mentioned Olokun before, so I didn't know if Olokun was a main Orisha or like a I don't know.
I know what you mean. So yes, so there are. I'm going to give you what I was told by my teachers, namely my teacher in Maolowo, Ogunwande Abimbola. He does whole lectures on this, or he has done whole lectures on this. But he would say we have 400 plus one Orisha. So plus one recognizes that idea of expansion, which is a very kind of essential idea in Yoruba philosophy. That we know that Olodumare is the creator of all things, and that all is not finite. It's not the all doesn't only exist in this time and space. All exist in time and space from the past, in the present, and in the future. So that means that we don't have infinite knowledge of what Orisha exists. We only know what we know. So we take that in humility and say plus one represents that we there are those that we don't know. But theologically, the idea is that we have a certain number of Orisha that represent cool energy, or energy that's balanced, and other Orisha that challenge us because they remind us of those imbalances that are in the world. So there's this idea that there's these Orisha that um, kind of balance each other out to give us this idea of a whole sense of our human condition, that we have these good parts of ourselves and these parts of ourselves that are balanced and well put together, and good, and expansive, and those that are sometimes um, you know needing more work, not so balanced and dark. So they kind of together bring us into this idea that we're all of those things, right? But there are hundreds of Orisha, and some that we know, that, like I say, the ones in Lukumi in Cuba that we know, who that the priests who were enslaved and brought to Cuba brought there. They brought what they knew of, and brought it, made it so that more people could experience and carry on in the lineage of caring for those Orishas and learning about ourselves through the Orisha. And then there are some that went to other places. Like there are some Orisha in Brazil that do not are not worshipped in Cuba. Same as in Suriname, same as in Trinidad, and there are some Orisha that are worshipped in the diaspora that lost their traditional worship in Nigeria. So so it's so in a way we all of us make up these different parts of what Orisha is, and that's why sharing knowledge and being open to hearing from other people and knowledge they have is important. There's a lot we can learn from places that have been preserving Orisha in quiet, that didn't have William Bascom, or or Melvin Herskovitz, or anyone else coming to find out about what they know. Because we know there are Risha worshippers in Mexico, but we really don't hear much about what that worship is about. We know that there were some in Suriname, and we know that there were some in other places that smaller islands in the diaspora that we we really don't know much about. So it's a big question, and it's also a very kind of local question too. How many Risha there are? Yes.
So there could be like an Orisha for like technology and intelligence that we wouldn't even know.
That's a good question. Yeah. So I think part of what it is too is that even as we change, language changes, environment changes, needs change. And so there may be Orishas that may define life in another time, or be named. Maybe it's a Orisha that we know now, but takes on another meaning because of the needs of people in another time. That that means that that Risha may be more important and prominent, right? So, like I've heard that some um, some Orisha priests in Cuba back in the that have been interviewed by historians and anthropologists have talked about an Orisha of the tongue. But the people in Nigeria say, yes, we used to have people who used to do that, to worship that Orisha, but we don't, no one here does that anymore. No one knows the secrets to how to keep that Orisha or to make that Orisha. So, um, so that's interesting, right? So we have some knowledge of that that was left in Cuba that no one carried on. No one, there's been no one who's learned how to bring that ashe of the tongue into existence in the future like they used to know. So, um, but there are other things that we have gained knowledge about that have not, that have been preserved and carried forward. But I think that the main thing is that we have, thanks to the women were who wanted to bring a structure and a process to how this work is done, even if there are a region in the future that we don't know now, or that we don't have the same use or prominence in caring for now. There's still going to be something recognizable in the way that Orisha is made, in the way that Orisha is cultivated. That's going to be connected back to Firminita and Oshabi and other Oriates, right? So that part won't be different. So that's part of the lineage, right? So how do you know what it is that you're making or developing or constructing or reconstructing from some idea of energy? Is because there's something that braids it together to some tradition, right? And those black women made sure that we could recognize what that looked like, right? So regardless of what changes, there's always going to be that. And I've seen it. I'm telling you, that braid is consistent. I've been in traditional ceremonies in Candomblé. I've been in traditional ceremonies in Lukumi. I've been in traditional ceremonies with people who are made in Oshogo and in Benin. There is a braid there that is consistent, that you can recognize certain very clear elements that are consistently the same in different traditions. Even if they say different things, even if there's order that may change, but there's something that's consistent in all of them. And that's the thing that I think makes it really powerful what those Black women did in different parts of the diaspora, is to make sure that there's something that we know to be the tradition, that it can be recognized literally from hundreds of years in the past to the present.
Can I ask another question? I don't want to take. I know other
Oh,
people make out questions, but
sure.
that's why I don't want to speak too much. I did have a, because I know you touched on it a little bit, but I was driving, so I wasn't exactly like locked in. Um, so with the sort of creation story and Olokun, and you have to forgive me because I'm like I got too much information in my head, so I'm like mixing up stories.
Me too.
So my apologies in advance. But
I have that same illness
right, I'm like, did I read that or
translated.
did I dream that? I can't remember anymore. But in terms of like and Zoe, please correct me. But so what I remember, or at least I think I remember, um, of like is it Olodumare
Hmm.
and the rooster and sand and
Yes.
making, and so So how does Olokun play into that story, or is that separate thing? Because it was
Yes,
water, right? Or,
yes. So the water, so the whole mass, there was no land base. That's right. So our that the creation story tells us that there was no land base that that anything or anyone can walk on. It was all Olokun owned the whole planet. That's why Olokun is so powerful. Olokun literally had to cede land to Obatala so that he could make human beings. Because the human beings were not to live in the ocean, they were to live on land. So the rooster descending down and all of that, and Obatala putting some sand down, and the rooster walking and spreading the sand all over. Yes, that is a part of it, but at the root of that is the fact that Olokun, who owned all of this, literally all of it, until Obatala descended, and made that different through establishing a land base for human beings to be able to plant, grow food, have children, and also fresh water because we needed fresh water, and that's where Oshun came in, right? So Oshun was not was was neglected by the other Orisha because she was the youngest Orisha, and no one paid her any mind, and they said, "Oh, this little," and so she was like, "Oh, okay, fine," and that was a problem for them. Why? Because they had no fresh water. And who owned the fresh water? Oshun. And so they couldn't have children. None of the plants would grow. People were starving. And they went back to Olodumare and said, "Oh, why?" He said, "Well, have you talked to Oshun?" "Oh, no." And it's like, "Well, there's your problem, right?" So Olokun is at the base of that story. So there is so yes, so Olokun is involved in that story because Olokun owned all the waters, and the earth was water. And so Olokun, because he has such dominion, challenged Olodumare to being the one in charge, so to speak, or the one who had owned all the power. And Olodumare basically outwitted Olokun, and that's how Olokun lost um, full dominion over the earth. To save us some time, because I could go into the whole story, but we have like 3 minutes, and I wanted to honor everybody's time.
no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, but that's a good question.
I was wondering, you talk about the two women that are responsible for not like for how we still worship Olokun today. And I'm just wondering, like, what lessons they have for us in terms of keeping things alive that are important to, and how, like, what does that mean, and what, I don't know, I just think about like what relationships do they have to the people around them, and how do they structure it, and how are they able to maintain these traditions even till today with so little compared to what we have today. Whereas what we see today goes by so quickly, and something new is popping up, and not necessarily anything better. But I'm just wondering, thinking about that.
That's a really good question. My gosh. Um, and so I've read, and I think if you guys read Olokun by Mason, you'll hear, and there have been other accounts that I've read and or have been told by my elders, is that they were women who were considered to be very humble and very giving, and willing to share knowledge with other priests. And I think some of the lessons that I think we could benefit from was that they saw themselves as part of a larger whole, and so they saw the role of working with people from other traditions and other areas of Egbado land and Ijesha and Oyo and Ibadan and wherever else they came from in different provinces in Cuba trying to work together, um, because they saw the need to use different information and synthesize that so that it made sense for a fuller structure. So seeing the idea of cooperation, I think, is something that they really did pass on to us. Is the idea of how important, and actually, that's a very much the way women organize, right? We organize cooperatively, and I think that cooperative nature helped the religion to be sustainable. If it had been just this thing where, we just everyone just kind of did their own thing, there would not have been any shared understanding of what that thing was. So um, I think it's that. I think also the fact that you have Obatero and Oshabi, who are not officially goddaughter and godmother, working together, and bringing forth between the two of them, and there are others like Aurora Lamar, uh, and there are others too, but I'm focusing on these two today. Um, they came together and made history without necessarily being goddaughter and godmother. That to me is pretty amazing. um, and it showed again the idea of cooperation and seeing the bigger picture and having and a woman accepting instruction and support from someone who as her elder without necessarily having that official connection of being godparent and godchild. Um, but the other thing I think in terms of lessons is that we gotta really respect women. I think there's been, particularly in Lukumi, I have to say, there's been a lot lost in that. I think, and that's why some people have been really doing a lot more research and finding out more about them and finding out more about what their legacy was and who they were and how they operated. They tended by everyone's accounting of them, they were women who were genuinely nice people, but were very serious when it came to the tradition and not and not pushovers or in any way, but definitely not overbearing, but just knew that they had a mission and they focused on it and got it done to the best of their ability. And um, and have a lot to show for it. That some of us who who consider ourselves caretakers of what they provided and what they sacrificed for, we take it seriously. We really do try to make sure that um, that we really try to honor what it was that they left us, so that we can actually have a tradition that we can see, even hopefully 200 years from now, if we still have a planet. So I think honoring and respecting what tradition means and is, and knowing that we are part of a bigger puzzle of what that is, and knowing that that means that if we're a puzzle, that means we're connected to other pieces. And so know that we don't operate as individuals um, uh, for the sake of whatever that is. I don't know, but know that we are connected to other people in genuine ways. And I think another in connection to that, I hope I'm not taking too long for you all, but I just really want to finish this thought because I think it was a really good, thoughtful question. I think the idea of priests um, kind of going it alone once you get so far in your age or in your tradition. I think that's another lesson they taught us, that it's good to have a structure that you support and that you're supported by as a priest or even as a worshiper. Um, that matters, to have a sense of community that you're a part of and that you contribute to. I think that's another lesson that they left us. And I think that's evident in how we work as an Elay, and I know of other Elays that work and actually have generations of Orisha priests that carry on that legacy, because it's important to stay connected to the root that forms the branches. So, and that's something that I'll do. I'll always do. I hope that answers your question, Amber, because it was a really good question. It could go in lots of different directions, but that's where my heart and my mind was.
It did answer. Thank you.
You're welcome. Kiara, I've not had the chance to introduce you to other folks, but everyone here pretty much knows each other. But I don't know how well, or I think you've been in one or two other ones, but yeah, because I didn't do introductions this time. But I wanted to give you a chance to ask any questions, and if you want to introduce yourself to everyone.
Hey y'all, sorry it's so dark. I actually got my daughter turning on the light for me. My name is Kiera. My pronouns are she and her, and it's hard for me to think of questions because all the information feels very new and I'm absorbing it, holding it. So I really appreciate what you just shared about the offerings from the women in the lineage. So that is really resonating with me right now. But overall, like the whole call and everything too as well. What else should I share? Is that it?
Whatever you feel like sharing. We're over time now, but I wanted to give you a chance since you know, folks are pretty familiar with other folks. I wanted to give you a chance to say hello.
Well, thank you for that. I'm located in North Carolina. I don't know where you all might be, but I'm in Greensboro. And yeah, a mama and a young person who's trying to be deeper in alignment with their spiritual journey. So I appreciate for sure sharing space with you all and being in community with you and growing in community with you. Hopefully, this is my second call.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's perfect.
Welcome.
All righty. Anyone else have any other questions or insights you'd like to share or thoughts? I did incorporate a lot of Q&A today, so I felt like I talked a lot, but I had a lot to say too, I guess.
It just made me feel really warm and kind of held when you read the excerpt about hope. And it just resonated with me and feeling like I'm in a transformative space. Like earlier this week, it just came to me and I was just like, I can't sabotage myself anymore. Like I'm not even in that space to self-sabotage. And I
Oh
was
man,
able to like
that's huge.
acknowledge it. Yeah. And I had to sit with that and kind of mourn it, but then also looking ahead and it's kind of hazy and I don't really know what's ahead or what tools I have now, but I know sabotage is no longer part of my tools. And so I've been kind of going through that. And then with getting into grad school, it's just like, okay, like you're like, everything was just like boom, boom, boom. And so like sitting here and hearing about hope and kind of going with the mystery and transformation, it's just all kind of coming full circle.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's huge. That's a big project. That's, as I mentioned, Oloku deals with big stuff. That's a big project. That's a lifelong project for many people, is to find ways to defeat self-sabotage. So I'm gonna say big ups to you and big ups to your spirit.
Will you share the quote from Hope about hope that you did either in the chat or later in the email?
Oh, sure. I can do that. I read it from a book. I read it from the book here, um, but I can definitely share it with everyone. I'd have to write it because it's actually in a physical book, but I can definitely share it with everybody. In fact, I could send the quote. Um, I could send the quote via email. I can do that for everybody here. That's not a problem at all. It's in the forward of the book.
Thank you for that.
Hmm.
I know we're going to close out, but I know tomorrow is the service centered around Shango.
Yes.
is there anything that we need to prepare or send, or we just show up?
You could just come. I'm not gonna present anything to Shango. Someone just presented something really beautiful for him. So I'm just gonna let him ride with that, and we're just gonna say some prayers for Shango.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. And I think that's it. Yeah, in terms of that. But yes, so I'm highlighting this book. Arena Risa is like it's a very big book. It's yes, I've had that book over the years, and I've worn out at least two copies of it. It's a book of Orisha songs as sung in Lukumi. It's a really it's an immeasurably important resource. Um, And this book, I think, is for when you guys get a little further along in your process and study. But this book I've recommended, Orisha New World Black Gods. I recommend it to folks who are beginning in the tradition in the past. And so I'll remind y'all again that this is a very good resource to use to kind of ground your idea of some of the major orishas that we worship in Lukumi. Okay. He has many other books, but these are some of the books. I have his other books on Eshu. He has a book that he wrote on Eshu, and he has a book he wrote on the great mothers, as he calls it, or our mothers, our great mothers, dealing with some lineages, some female orishas. That's a really interesting, really interesting and ambitious book that he did. Um, so with that, thank you all for hey, sweetheart. Good to see you. You can have your mama back in like 2 minutes, okay? Hey, Tranika. I think, are you waving at me or somebody else? I don't know. I guess you're waving at us. She made it safely back to Tampa. Yay. Here she is. Good to see you.
I feel like I should introduce me and my dad. So,
Go for it. Go for it.
I'm Esai.
Wait, really? Do we have to?
Yeah.
You got the spirit moves you to introduce us, huh?
Yeah.
So I'm Esai. I'm 15. I usually don't wear glasses. I'm just wearing them today. Andres L. Hernandez is my dad, and I recently changed my Zoom name to Esai A. Hernandez.
All right. There you go. Hey, sweetheart.
Yes. You want to hear a story?
You want to tell a story? Sure.
You can play the princess.
Okay. Thank you.
The king were about to have a dance party.
Yay.
And suddenly the big dragon rolled the house down. Daddy.
The end. Okay, I'm gonna go on mute, y'all. Sorry.
Thank you for the story. Yay. All right. Oh, I think that's to be to continue. We're going to hear that story later. It sounds beautiful. All right. All righty, y'all. Well, it has been wonderful. Oh, Katie, you have something?
Oh, I was trying to send a message to Kiera to let her know that I was obsessed with North Carolina. And then you said you were from Greensboro, North Carolina, and my brother lived there. So it's just like super, super full circle.
Wow.
So I was trying to send that to you, but it didn't work.
Okay. Small world when you make it one. All you got to do is say something, right? It's always small world when we make it one. Yeah. And Darius, otherwise known as Fatumbi, he is also equally obsessed with North Carolina, and he was supposed to be here with us tonight. Y'all probably remember him talking about it, right? So so yeah, so he's gonna. Y'all can tell him somebody was on the call from North Carolina, from Greensboro. Yeah, all right. She feeling the love, y'all. That's what's up. All right. Well, it has been lovely seeing all of you. Kiara, do you have the? I don't know if you'll be able to make it tomorrow, but are you on the list for the prayers for Saturday too? You're not. Okay, I'll add. I can. I can add. I can add you. And, you know, if you can come, you can come. It's just prayers to Shango.
Thank you.
Well, we do prayers to different Orisha on Saturdays when we can. Okay. All righty, y'all. It was wonderful seeing all your faces, and I'll see as many of you as can make it tomorrow.
All right.
Everybody have a good
Have a
one. Be
good
Have a
safe.
good
night.
night.
Be
Good
good.
night,
Be
Sun's
safe.
still
y'all.
out.
Right.
Okay.
Right. It is still out right here.
Yep.